You know, in the late 90s and early 2000s, something really dramatic happened in Spain. The government sold off its most valuable public companies in what they called a silent revolution. But was it a bold leap into economic modernization, or was it actually one of the biggest transfers of public wealth into private hands in recent history? Well, let's get into it.
It all kicked off with messages just like this one. To convince the public to get on board with privatizing Iberia, the national airline, the government didn't really launch a financial campaign. Nope, they launched an emotional one.
I mean, this ad was a work of art, a real masterpiece of emotional marketing. You've got these images of purity, of innocence, all set to this incredibly dreamlike soundtrack. The goal was to frame a massive, complex economic change as this beautiful, hopeful new dawn. They were basically selling the public something they already owned, but wrapping it up in this feeling of progress.
But as you can probably guess, behind that soft focus promise was a much, much harder reality. And the privatization of Iberia, it became a textbook case for all the controversies that would define this entire era.
When you look at this timeline, a real pattern starts to emerge, right? Even before the privatization really got going, there were scandals, like secret commissions being paid to Boeing. And the process itself was just riddled with these questionable events, from a fraud investigation in Venezuela all the way to a huge last-minute chop to the company's value.
And this sudden drop in value is absolutely crucial. Right before it was about to go public, Iberia's worth was slashed by over 20%. The state's own watchdog, the Privatization Council, actually came out and officially criticized the sale. They pointed to a total lack of clear reasons and transparency for this massive discount.
Okay, so fast forward a few years. After Iberia merges with British Airways, analysts came up with this brilliant term to describe the new reality: a mercantile illusion. Basically, it's a corporate trick. The company is set up to look Spanish on paper, mostly so it can hang on to its valuable European flight licenses, while the real power, the real control, and of course the real profits, they're all based somewhere else.
And this slide just lays out the result of that illusion. Today, Spain's former national airline is overwhelmingly owned by Qatar Airways and a bunch of international funds. And the Spanish state itself, it holds on to a tiny 2.5% stake.
But here's the thing. The story of Iberia wasn't some isolated incident. Not at all. It was just one piece of a massive, deliberate wave of privatizations that completely reshaped the entire Spanish economy. So, between 1996 and 2004, the government, led by José María Aznar, set out on what he himself actually called a silent revolution. The whole idea was to liberalize the economy by selling off the state's most strategic and profitable companies, what people called the family jewels.
And the scale was just breathtaking. We're talking about the absolute pillars of the national economy here. The main phone company, the biggest electricity provider, the national oil and gas giant, the public bank. These weren't just assets on a spreadsheet. They were the essential services that people depended on every single day. And they were all sold off to private investors.
Which, of course, brings us to the most critical question of all. Who really benefited from this historic sell-off? Well, when you follow the money, the numbers tell a truly staggering story. Let's start with what the state got out of it. For selling off literally decades of public investment, the Spanish treasury got a one-time payment of roughly 40 billion euros. Now that's a huge sum, for sure, but it is a single injection of cash. Now compare that to what the new private owners made. In just one decade, between 2011 and 2020, just 5 of those privatized companies paid out nearly 60 billion euros in dividends to their new shareholders. This chart just makes that contrast, well, painfully clear. The bar on the left, that's the state's total one-and-done income. The bar on the right, that's what private shareholders earned in just 10 years. They made more in a single decade than the state made from selling everything.
And this graph shows you the long-term picture perfectly. The state's income is that flat line. One payment, and that's it. Game over. But the private shareholders' income, that's a constantly rising river of wealth, just flowing out of the country, year after year after year.
One analysis summed it up with this incredibly powerful metaphor. The government got a one-time payment for the tree itself, but the private sector, they got to harvest all of its fruit forever.
So what is the legacy of this silent revolution? I mean, decades later, the debate in Spain is hotter than ever, and it's all focused on transparency,
fairness, and who really truly won in the end.
A key part of all the controversy is this concept puertas giratorias, or revolving doors. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's the well-documented practice of high-ranking government officials, the very people who managed the privatizations, later taking cushy, high-paying jobs on the boards of those exact same companies. It just raises some very serious questions about conflicts of interest.
The source material we looked at ends with this really critical insight. While most of these deals were done within the letter of the law, the whole process is seen by many critics as a moral and political failure. It was a transfer of public wealth that, while technically legal, felt like a robbery to a huge part of the population.
And the lasting impact is really clear. Spain lost public control over strategic sectors like energy and telecom. A continuous river of national wealth was diverted into private and often foreign hands. And it created these powerful private oligopolies, which critics argue just led to higher prices and less choice for everybody, sparking a debate about economic sovereignty that is still going strong today.
So that leaves us with the central question, doesn't it? Was this a necessary, bold step toward economic modernization that put Spain on the map? Or was it, as the data seems to show, one of the largest, most audacious transfers of public wealth to private interests in modern history?